talking today to children's illustrator Dana Kubick about stereo 3D images. You use stereoscopic drawing in your children's books that you've done. What's the basic principle of 3D stereo images? How does it work?
Well, the basic principle is simply replicating what the eye and the brain does for us all the time. We're looking at a 3D world with two eyes that are about 65 millimeters apart. It allows us to see that object in two different viewpoints, and our brain puts those two images together and the image looks solid.
So each individual eye is in effect producing a 2D image and then resolving it together.
Yes.
To produce a 3D image.
Yes. I mean, you have, and the whole history of stereoscopic imagery from the very beginning has been on that principle of taking two images, two 2D images, two different viewpoints, and how one can then do what the brain does so cleverly in combining those two images and making a solid image. The Greek word stereos is the word for solid, and that is where we get stereo and stereo optics, obviously. Is an optical way of recreating a solid world, a three-dimensional world. And
how did you discover stereoscopic images?
I was a child with a Viewmaster, like many of my generation, and as a twin, I shared my Viewmaster with my sister. So fortunately, I have my husband's Viewmaster because he was a child with a Viewmaster, and we were enthralled by this. It's what I still love about it so much, that it's such a simple process, such simple technology, but it still has that magical and that wonder of creating a world before us.
So where did the earliest stereoscopic images come from?
Well, the idea, the notion of stereo imagery started, people were interested in it almost always. Euclid in 4th century BC was talking about the perception of each eye seeing a different view, and that is probably giving us our ability to see three-dimensionally. Leonardo da Vinci was very interested in it and did quite a lot of studies of binocular vision and did some experiments to try to understand it. Of course, the whole notion of describing perspective was terribly interesting and interested by painters at that time, trying to replicate the world they saw around us.
And he was unhappy that painting couldn't really produce the kind of 3D imagery.
Well, he was in despair that it couldn't.
Yes.
And he in his treatise of painting, he said that this is impossible. He did set up a little experiment, but unfortunately, the object he had in the near ground was a column, and that's the one thing, whatever direction you see it from, it doesn't identify that it's changing shape. And so he missed that one moment, missed Leonardo's opportunity to really identify how to recreate that image.
And stereoscopic images went into mass production in the mid-19th century. How did that come about?
Well, it started with Charles Wheatstone in the 1830s, who made the first device for allowing us to see three-dimensional images easily. Photography wasn't really... he didn't have access to photographs. He didn't try. He'd had two drawings and a set of mirrors in the middle, and by just looking at those two mirrors, it would allow the brain... You want the brain to see the left-hand image with the left eye and the right-hand image with the right eye. And the whole history of stereoscopic photography and imagery is different ways of trying to make that happen. He did it with mirrors and quite a big device. And it wasn't until Daniel Brewster in the 18th... It wasn't
really a mass production device, was it?
It wasn't possible to be mass production, or particularly portable. Yeah. But David Brewster in the 1850s created the first the first workable stereo viewer, and created an object that looked like this. This is a Brewster stereo viewer. And he couldn't get it mass produced in this country, so he went to France, and the first Brewster stereo viewers were made there. He was intelligent enough to bring a viewer back and brought it to the Crystal Palace and presented it to Queen Victoria, and Victoria and Albert adored it and found it very exciting. And they, with their influence, it became enormously popular. With 5 years, there were 1 million stereoscopic viewers in homes around the UK.
Yeah.
And it almost as rapidly spread around the world. It spread especially to America, where it was enormously popular. I mean, particularly for being allowed to travel to parts of the world one would never see. The first stereo views were scenes. But it was difficult to get cabinet makers to make these beautiful objects. It wasn't going to be a particularly cheap and mass-producible object. So Oliver Wendell Holmes...
So that was probably relatively expensive, that?
It was, and it needed a degree of craftsmanship to be made. The card goes in there. This little door, by the way, allows you to get light, bounce light onto the front of the stereo view. And there's a ground glass viewer, so you can also use it almost like a slide and see through the stereo view, which is an interesting thing that the Victorians did.
So then we come on to the one that you have.
Well, this was amazingly popular in the 1850s and probably 60s and 70s. It probably started dwindling out because Oliver Wendell Holmes created this, which we still call a Holmes-style stereoscope.
And Oliver Wendell Holmes is...
He's a very famous American essayist and writer. And a lot of people don't know, and even people who know of the Holmes-style stereoscope don't connect the two names. But this was easier, cheaper to make, and added to the popularity of the stereo views. He also believed in its educational aspects, and he personally really encouraged tens of thousands, which became millions, of stereo views to be printed to expand people's horizons, and that geographical scenes was something he found really important. And the exciting thing always about stereo views is that you're looking into a very realistic three-dimensional world. So when people weren't able to travel in the mid and early 19th century, places like Japan and Egypt came to them because you look through here and you're in that scene. And you can practically touch the pyramids.
And you're in an exotic place.
Yes.
Far away from... And what was the reaction to this technology in the Victorian period? How did people regard it?
Well, it was exciting. There's the London Stereoscopic Company produced millions of stereo views. I mean, they were the driving force in the UK, and their stereo photographers became like rock stars, which is a nice twist because T.R.Williams was one of their most famous and most often produced stereoscopic photographer, who worked in the 1850s, and his work has been reproduced by Brian May, who has been interested in
former guitarist with Queen.
Brian May.
Yes.
Who's been passionate about stereoscopic images ever since he was a 12-year-old boy and found stereoscopic images in his Weetabix packets.
And he has published a book, hasn't he?
Yes, he has.
Of those images.
It's called Village Lost and Found.
Yeah.
Which is a collection of T.R.Williams photographs of what people thought might be a fictional village, but Brian May has actually investigated and found the village that was photographed.
Used for the photograph.
They're not only very beautiful photographs, but it shows a moment in time just before the Industrial Revolution really made an impact on normal British life.
A pre-industrial village, as it were. Yeah.
So it has special magic in all kinds of ways.